Overfishing in the Mediterranean has been a problem for decades. It has never been solved, which results in the fact that over 90% of fish stocks in the Mediterranean are overexploited.
When overfishing is impacting those juveniles that have not had a chance to reach sexual maturity, it's just destroying the ecosystem and utterly crippling the fish stocks. And there's just no hope at all of us maintaining sustainable fisheries if we're taking non-sexually mature fish out of the water.
The main focus of FishAct as a marine conservation NGO lies on illegal practices within the fishing industry. For now, we focus mainly on the Northern Atlantic, the Baltic Sea and the Mediterranean Sea.
So one goal of our campaigns is always to get as much information on the actual state of the fisheries as possible, because getting data on how many vessels are fishing with what kind of gear and what species they're targeting is something that is super hard to find online or in the literature, because it's very badly reviewed and documented, basically. So we always do that first, and we just go through the ports and just record every single fishing vessel that is there, what kind of nets or fishing gear it has on board, and what kind of species it is landing. So there are a lot of laws in place that are regulating fisheries, but they're not enforced. So they're just existing on papers, and the eyes out in the ports and markets to really enforce these laws are missing. And we're trying to fill that gap by visiting these areas, documenting illegal fishing if we find these activities, and then handing these reports of evidence to the enforcement agencies so they can direct their work better. What we do with FishAct is that we basically open these undercover work in ports and market to normal citizens. So we offer training courses where people can learn how to identify fishing vessels, different types of fishing gear, also fish species. We offer all this information. We do a training also with a field day where we can see fishing vessels in the field and identify them together. And after this course, people are invited to join our field campaigns.
So I joined FishAct in May 2015, and the first thing I did with them was to join a citizen inspector training in Hamburg. After that I went on an investigation in the UK in the same year, in August. And since then I've been helping basically wherever help was needed, but my focus lies on the field work. So my primary role within the organization is to train people, train new citizen inspectors, and coordinate and conduct field investigations like the one we're conducting right now here on Sicily. The Mediterranean is quite a small sea, but it's surrounded by 22 nations that kind of share the same fish stocks. So it creates a lot of competition for the few resources left in the sea.
Many of the most important fishing ports of Italy and the whole Mediterranean are located here. And we know that a lot of swordfish is traded here in the fish markets.
So the Citizen Inspector Network, you could say it's a civilian fisheries law enforcement network. So the aim of it is to actually empower regular citizens to take matters into their own hands and to get eyes out in the ports and the fish markets to watch out for illegal fishing practices and to report them to the authorities. The idea came from the fact that most nations, actually even the most developed ones, are struggling to enforce fisheries laws.
There are regulations nearly everywhere, especially in the European Union, but there are only a few boats of the Coast Guard and so on that really enforce those laws. They have no chance to have eye on each fishing boat that is out there. And that makes it very complicated, and I think that's the reason why the fishing stocks are declining in the Mediterranean faster than anywhere else.
Primarily we've come out here to look into the sword fishing industry, and we've heard that there's a real problem with juvenile swordfish being caught and landed, but whilst we've been out here the problem seems to be far more widespread than just the swordfish species. It seems like almost every species being caught in the Mediterranean is being caught juvenile and massively undersized. We've probably seen 15 different species here in the last week that are being caught when they are real juveniles. They've had no opportunity to mature, no opportunity to reproduce. I feel like what we're doing out here is bearing witness to the truth and the reality of fishing in the Mediterranean, and hopefully opening people's eyes to how dire the situation really is.
Over 90% of the stocks are already overexploited, and this is the moment this has to change. If we don't change it now, we will lose a lot of species within the next years.
What was really devastating was being on the public markets just right in the middle of a major town, loads of tourists about, and there being a huge number of swordfish and a number of juvenile fish just openly on display, entirely illegal catch sizes. Catch size for swordfish in the Mediterranean is 90 centimetres from the end of the sword to the tip of the tail. We were seeing creatures for sale over there that their full length, including the sword, was maybe 40 centimetres. So a third of the legal catch size. These are creatures that are maybe only a few months old, and they are so far away from sexual maturity. They're being caught, they're being landed, and they're being sold publicly. They're not even being snuck under the counter into restaurants or sold out the back of cars illegally on the streets. They were just being sold in the open market, and that's just terrifying.
Up to 70% of the swordfish catch in the Mediterranean is made of juveniles, which is a shame and really puts the future of this fish species here in the Mediterranean at danger. Our vision is not to stop all fisheries or to make all fishing around the world illegal, because of course there are nations and people and coastal communities that need fish to survive. But European super trawlers that are traveling to West Africa and there deplete all the fish stocks because people here are not willing to give up eating fish 3, 4, 5 times a week. That's just something that has to stop. Now the Mediterranean is in such a bad shape and the fish stocks are so overexploited that a lot of species are really struggling to recover. Even if the fishing quotas are decreased or national parks are built up, it will take another 5-6 decades before we really see fish stocks in the Mediterranean recovering. If you work in conservation, you always have to be positive and you always have to be hopeful because there's a vision of a future that you're working towards.
The most important thing is to just stay hopeful and not to fall into the illusion that the issue is actually so big that you cannot do anything about it yourself.
I really think every one of us can make positive choices for the oceans every day. So even if you are not able to become an activist, if you don't want to do field work, and even if you don't have money to donate to NGOs, you can always, every day, make positive choices for the oceans. And the most important and maybe also easy one is to just stop or reduce fish and seafood consumption.
It is very hard to be optimistic about the future of our oceans when there are so many fisheries and there are so many people who rely on fishing for their livelihoods and to put food on the table of their families. I understand why there are fishermen going out there and landing whatever they can catch, because they have to. And so with that in mind, it's extremely difficult to be optimistic, but I also believe that the tide is really turning in terms of the public consciousness and the people who are choosing to do something different about it. And whether that's just choosing to only eat fish once or twice a month and making sure that you're eating good quality fish that's locally caught and is definitely of a, from a mature specimen, so it has a chance to reproduce. Little things like that, if that spreads, then that makes a real difference. Maybe choosing to go vegan, maybe choosing to become a citizen inspector and get out here and expose what's really going on. The public consciousness is changing.